The actual naked body that you and I have are sacred. They are to be protected. Our nakedness is meant to be hidden from the eyes of other people. And that even within the family, that's the case. In Noah's situation, he'd been through the great flood. He had had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives that had been on the boat with him. There were 8 people that were rescued, and they came out on the other side, and Noah began to grow grapevines and began to make wine. And the account tells us that he not only grew the wine, in fact, we'll pick it up there, I guess, in Genesis chapter 9 and verse 20. It says, Noah began to be a husbandman, a cultivator of crops. He planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine and was very drunk, and he was lying naked in his tent. Now, they were still just living in tents. This was after the flood had happened. He had made himself wine. He was drunk, lying in his tent, naked on the floor. And one of his sons, Ham, who was the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father. Now, you would think, if you had any sense at all, that once one male has seen his own nakedness, he's seen the nakedness of all men, because they all look the same, right? And that's the mindset that some people have. Sacredness doesn't apply to nakedness. Nakedness is just one of those natural things that we shouldn't be ashamed of. Well, we know that there's a moral element to our nakedness, and that shame that people feel about their nakedness is actually biblical. It comes out of the nature that God has given to us. Anyway, this boy Ham went and told his brothers, hey, Dad's lying naked, stark naked on the floor of the tent. Ha! And these 2 boys, the other brothers, they went to the tent and they didn't see their father's nakedness. Instead, they held a blanket between them on their shoulders, and they walked backwards, dragging that thing across their dad's body so that they would not see his nakedness. They covered his shame and his nakedness. You think, why would they do that? Why couldn't they have looked on their father's naked body? I mean, any man has seen his own nakedness. He knows what nakedness looks like. It shouldn't be something to be concerned about. But they understood, morally, that nakedness is sacred. And even though it's their own father's nakedness, it was still something that was to be sacred and that was to be protected, and they covered up their father's nakedness. Now, that leads us to a problem, because if every single one of us has sacred nakedness that's not allowed to be seen by somebody else, how do you get married and spend time intimately with somebody else if their nakedness is sacred and your nakedness is sacred? Well, that's easy to solve. God solved it way back in the beginning, and it takes a moral miracle. Every single one of us carries in our person sacred nakedness. That's why things like pornography and voyeurism, the movies that people make where nakedness is exposed, clubs that people might go to, or different things that people might want to do that are centered around nakedness, are all immoral. They have a very strong moral twist to them, because the nakedness is sacred. It's not meant to be on public display, not for advertising products or eroticizing people or getting viewers to a movie or a stage production. It's sacred. But God has to have a way of overcoming the barrier of the sacred nakedness for husbands and wives. And he does that by creating a moral miracle where both the husband and wife become the one body. And that's what was said way back in Genesis chapter 2 in the Bible. It says, therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother and cleave to his wife, and the 2 shall be one flesh. Talking about a moral miracle taking place. So when a wedding ceremony is being performed, as I perform a wedding ceremony as a minister, and the couple come before me and I hear their vows and we go through all of the procedure, and I pronounce them man and wife, at that moment God creates a moral miracle. He now sees that the woman's body and the man's body are the same. There's 4 knees on that body now. There are 4 elbows, 2 heads. There are now a combination of only one body. And just as it's not an immoral thing for me to see my own nakedness, it would be immoral for you to see it, but it would not be immoral for me. So once a moral miracle takes place and I have a wife, then it's not immoral for her to see my nakedness or for me to see hers. However, if I was to go and see someone else's nakedness, that would be immoral, because the nakedness is sacred. So catch those 2 principles. There's a principle of sacred nakedness. And then there's the issue of the moral miracle which God has put in place. And that's why we can jump across to Hebrews chapter 13 and see this verse in verse 4, where it says this, marriage is honorable in all, and the bed is undefiled. But whoremongers and adulterers God will judge. And so here we have this understanding that sexual intimacy in the marriage bed is completely undefiled. It's perfect and reasonable and a beautiful thing to be enjoyed. But to go and have sex with a whore, with a prostitute, or someone outside of your own marriage relationship, or adultery with someone else that you're not married to, that's something that God will judge, because nakedness is sacred. Now here's the problem for people in our Western world. They've come to think of the marriage relationship only in the terms of the interpersonal affectional relationship. They've stopped considering the formal covenantal relationship, the legal part that God has put in place. And so as long as they feel in love, they think the marriage can survive. When that emotional relationship breaks down, they might go and try and have an emotional relationship with someone else. But they're forgetting that marriage is two relationships. It's both the relational aspect of the emotional, interpersonal companionship, but it's also the covenant relationship. And that covenant relationship involves a miracle that can't be easily undone, a miracle that is performed by God, a moral miracle that deals with sacred nakedness. And until and unless you understand that and deal with it appropriately, you could be in very, very dangerous ground in terms of your own relationship. A couple who, for instance, are deeply in love with each other and they're ready to get married, they've planned it for a year, the big day has been established. As the time leads up to that wedding, they could say to themselves, why don't we now act like a married couple? Why don't we go to bed together and have sexual intimacy? Because, in fact, we're as good as married. Like, we're deeply in love, we're buying a house together, everything's planned, it's now only 2 weeks to the wedding ceremony. Why don't we just consummate the marriage now? And some couples might enter into that foolishness. Why it's foolishness is this. No matter how much they are deeply in love at an affectional level, no matter how good their companionship is, the formal aspect of that marriage hasn't taken place. The moral miracle is missing. And so when they have any kind of sexual intimacy with each other, in any way whatsoever, they're actually violating the issue of sacred nakedness. Even if it's just the night before the wedding, it's still a violation of a moral principle. Its sacred nakedness has been violated. They have to wait until the wedding day has happened and they've been pronounced man and wife, and the moral miracle has taken place.